This is Author Talk, brought to you by Author House, the leading provider of services to help authors publish, promote, and sell their books. Author Talk is produced by TogiNet Radio, on the web at toginet.com.
Greetings for Author Talk. This is J. Douglas Barker. Our book today is titled Touching God, A Journey, a Guide to Mysticism in Christianity and Islam. Our author, Dr. Brad Tyndall. Welcome, sir, to the program.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
You have a fascinating background as far as your studies. You've studied in France, you've studied French, you've studied Arabic. Arabic is a language that most listeners that are a part of this show have never heard before. Is there anything in Arabic you could greet us with, perhaps?
Sure. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh, which is a very long, blessing way to say, peace be upon you. Hello.
Peace be upon. Well, and I heard it with a French accent. Is that something I shouldn't have heard?
Hopefully not. But I did study. I started my studies in Arabic in France with Tunisian and Moroccan instructors. So a little French may sneak into my Arabic.
A little bit of everything. You've hitchhiked through France and Germany, the beautiful parts of the world. Those who have not been to Europe, those are spectacular areas. You've worked for the U.S. State Department. You've been an economist in Kenya. Rather varied background. And then now this, as an author, you have written a book, Touching God, A Journey, a Guide to Mysticism in Christianity and Islam. Brad, why did you decide you wanted to share your information, share your knowledge of both of these religions in this book?
Well, it started at 9/11 when the terrorists struck New York City and Pennsylvania and Washington, D.C. I was at a community college in Colorado, and it was just very frightening. And we all got together and said, hey, what can we do? There's Arabic, or anyone who looked Arabic or Middle Eastern at all, or even brownish, didn't feel safe to come to school. And said, we have to do something. I said, well, hey, I was a Peace Corps volunteer for 4 years. I speak Arabic. I've been reading a lot about Sufism, which is very loving Islamic mysticism. And so I said, hey, let me do a presentation called The Loving Side of Islam. And I can bring more educated, loving, intelligent perspective to it. So I started doing these loving side of Islam presentations, and I'd done them at Rotary Clubs, the Lions Clubs. And what I found is that people felt it was kind of very alien. So I started comparing it to Christianity. You know, we do this, they do that. It's very similar. And what I found is that at their core, their mystical core, when you kind of strip away religious practices, they're very, very similar. And so it became inadvertently kind of my own religious journey, or continued my religious journey into kind of the heart of faith. And so the last time I was scheduled to do this talk as a seminar, a several-week seminar, I said, well, I better write up all this stuff, because this is getting to the point where PowerPoint presentations aren't cutting it. So I just converted it into a book, basically. And I said, wow, now I'm ready for next time. And I said, wow, maybe I should do something with this book. And that's how it came to fruition.
So you feel this book will appeal to a large audience, not just the individuals you were addressing during your live talks.
Oh, absolutely. I'm hoping that it'll appeal to Muslims, because they will see the very strong, deep parallels to Christianity. And I think that they'll find that I say such loving, wonderful things from a kind of a new perspective that they'll enjoy. I think Christians will say, oh my gosh, this is so interesting, because I had no idea Islam said all these wonderful things about Mary and Jesus and all these other cool things. And I had no idea that the Quran was so beautiful and had such a wonderful cadence and refrain. And I'm hoping that people who like poetry, I think, will like it. I know that throughout the book, I quote a lot of Sufi poets like Rumi and Hafez, and people who love that type of literature are just going to find this is just perfect for them. Because it kind of resonates in that kind of Sufi-loving poetry, or in the Christian sense, kind of songs of Solomon, kind of loving scriptural things. And so I think a lot of people of faith and non-faith, and maybe the Buddhists and others will say, this is loving. This just feels really good, you know? And finding this commonality between faiths just feels right. And I think a lot of people are just kind of going to go, just finally something loving and positive. And I think it'll resonate with a lot of people. I really hope so.
Describe the process of writing your book. Was there a lot of research involved? Was this just from personal experience? I noticed in your first chapter you drew some personal experiences into the narrative. How did you go about writing this?
Well, I think that a lot of it, you know, came from anecdotes, a lot of epiphanies, and not learning from people. I guess the first major whammy for me was meeting really, really nice Muslims. When I was in France as a student, it was very hard to meet French people because they have lives, they have friends, and you come in as an outsider. And so the other outsiders, the many Muslims in France, kind of adopted me and took care of me, and kind of, you know, I had a problem with an employer who wasn't paying me. Some Tunisians came to rescue and said, hey, you got to pay this guy. And so then I started saying, well, hey, maybe I should study Arabic because this Muhammad, Allah thing seems kind of interesting. And then I went to Sudan. I met such loving, nice people. I said, I'm going to just take another, look at this. And then in my doing the loving side of Islam presentations, I did a lot of reading so much of the Christian mystics. I mean, that's kind of like maybe my next book is the history of the Christian mystics and Islamic mystics. And I found just so many wonderful things. And I feel to a certain extent it wasn't all coincidence because it was just too much serendipity here and meeting the right people at the right time. And I'm now living kind of in the shadow of the warmth of the Benedictine monastery in Snowmass, and they have the best library and bookstore on mysticism, and they have some of the most well-known worldwide mystics, Christian mystics there, and it's just been, a lot of reading, a lot of books, in Islamic books, Christian mysticism books such as Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, Thomas Merton, and it's just been, in a way, it's just been a lot of fun, and it's also been something that kind of warms your heart every step of the way. So it's been good. It's been a really good trip.
You've spent some time in Sudan as well. Share some of that experience, if you will, if there's anything that might be pertinent to today's observations politically.
Well, I think the most important thing to note is that the percentage of radicals is relatively small. It's just a few percentage of fundamentalist, hate mongers. And in Sudan, for example, I would say it's like 98% knock your socks off, kinder than you can imagine people. And then there's in every faith, there's just some people who are just hateful, and I don't think they really represent the faith. In Sudan, for example, when I went there, as a Peace Corps volunteer, and I stayed there for 4 years, I went to a local market to buy food. It's basically, beans and bread for breakfast. And I went to pay for my food, and this is a very broken down restaurant. You imagine goats trying to eat your food and things at the table, and it's just filthy. And they kind of wash your bowl in dirty water. And I said, okay. So I went to pay for my food, maybe 50 cents worth, and somebody jumps up and invokes the name of Allah and says, in the name of God, I got to pay. You're a guest in our country, and no, it brings blessing to me and my family. Let me buy this for you. And I'm going, oh, well, okay. Well, in all honesty, I couldn't pay for food for over a month. And every poor soul would jump up, and finally, when it was all done, I said, there isn't anybody in this neighborhood who hasn't paid for me. And I went up to pay, and the owner of the restaurant said, nope, you're not paying. Uh-huh. And so I finally got, and I mean, the kindness of the people is just mind-blowing. And you think, well, how can that exist when you hear about terrorism and roadside bombs and this, that, and the other? And I think there's just percentage of hate mongers in all faiths. And Christianity, of course, did the Inquisition, burned Jews and heretics alive. And I'm thinking, you know what? Islam's going through a bad spell with these small percent of radicals. And I think it's important to try to nurture the 98% of the good and not discard them, and don't over-focus or design your politics too heavily around the 2% of hate mongers. And so I think that was a really big lesson for me.
In writing your book, how long did it take to finish? completed?
Oh, since 9/11 until about, fairly recently. It took many, many years because it's just kind of grown and grown and grown. And there was a lot of reading the Quran and making I get it right, because I really don't want to upset people. People are very sensitive about their faith, and so it slowly evolved over about a 10-year period, basically, and it finally kind of came all together. When I started cranking away at it, I think it took about 6 months, but by then I'd done so much research. It was really a question of quoting whom and that kind of thing. I mean, the book has a whole lot of footnotes and a huge bibliography. It's kind of a great list, actually, just to look at in terms of look at all these the seminal books to read in Islamic and Christian mysticism. And so, it was 10 years of reading and putting it together. And I've studied Arabic, so I don't get rusty. So there was a lot of hours studying Arabic and keeping that fresh somewhat too.
Incredible.
Work.
Yes, spend a couple of sentences and share with my listeners how you would introduce this book to someone.
I would say that this book is a loving journey itself. It pretty much speaks to the heart of the seeker and talks a little bit of my seeking journey, and then it sprinkles in a whole lot of kind of loving verses from the Bible and a lot of loving poetry, Sufi poetry from Hafiz and Rumi, and then it kind of takes you on the quest of what is faith and what's it all about, and it digs at its spiritual core. It speaks constantly of saying, okay, what are the outward and physical signs of religion? And then it asks the question, what is the inward and spiritual grace, whether it's prayer or prayer beads or chanting or singing, going on a pilgrimage? And it digs at that core and finds it's always a pathway to God, a pathway to love, and it basically speaks to the yearning of the human heart for love. And so in a sense, the book, it does go through the 5 pillars of Islam, but looks at them with a light of love and meditation and getting closer to God. And it goes through Christianity, its basic tenets, and saying, hey, but what it's really trying to do is this loving outreach to God. And so I think by the end of it, people hopefully feel like, wow, I just went on a love journey. And I think I've learned some things along the way, and I think, I have a new perspective of reaching out to God, and maybe to some extent I've become a mystic. And I understand and I feel that love. So I'm hoping it'll be a loving experience and also a little bit of an intellectual journey, because there's showing some very interesting, powerful things in the Quran and the Bible along the way. And it provides a framework of kind of reading these things without being really too preachy. It's very kind of open and non-judgmental. And so I think people will feel closer to God, I hope, by the end of it.
In the stories you've recounted and the personal journey that you've had, is there one story that maybe stands out that is going to grab the reader, in addition to the one that you've mentioned about Sudan?
Oh, there's so many different stories. There's kind of funny ones, and there's serious ones. I guess the more funny one that comes to mind is I was walking through outside of Sharm el-Sheikh. It's a town in Egypt. And I was walking along the desert, and there were some people chanting, going around and around in a circle, and I was kind of watching them going, that looks interesting. And they were chanting and banging the tambourine. And then someone looked over and saw me and said, yeah, how are ya? And that basically said, oh, gringo. And they kind of, just making fun in a very nice way. And I spoke back and said something, and I said, yeah, halabi, which is kind of slightly insulting way to call an Egyptian kind of thing, but it was all in fun and loving spirit, and they called me over. And so I ended up chanting and dancing with them. And it was a really beautiful time. And then they stopped and said, now it's your turn to chant. And I'm thinking, I don't know what to chant. I don't know any Gregorian chants, or I don't know what's going to work. And so I thought of row, row, row your boat.
Right.
It's like, well, they don't know what it means. They don't speak English. They have no idea what I'm chanting. So I started saying, row, row, row your boat. And they would go, row, row, row your boat. I go gently down the stream. And so here we were in the desert, in this full, beautiful sky of stars, and we're going around singing, row, row, row your boat. Life is but a dream.
That's hilarious.
And it was, that was one experience that I thought, wow.
That's a funny story. I'm glad you shared that. There must have been some challenges in completing your book. Are there any that were difficult to overcome, or was it all fun and games?
I think part of it was researching the Quran. I was looking at studying very carefully for all the references of love, and studying very carefully references to Mary, and they referenced Mary a lot, like over 30 times, very lovingly with respect and stories of Jesus. But I wanted to look at that very carefully so someone wouldn't come later and say, no, I think you misinterpreted the understanding. So I'd read something in Arabic and read something in one version of English translation, then another saying, I don't want to mess this up. It's just, Christians and Muslims since, before the Crusades have been fighting, and I don't want to make things worse. So I was a lot of effort to always keep a mindset of love and thorough research, and so that took some extra special care.
Brad, since you're a specialist in Arabic, is there any final words you'd like to share with us?
Well, I want the listeners to know that there's so much love, and the basic refrain in Arabic, in Islam, is that God is kind and merciful. And in fact, every single book of the Quran starts out with saying, God is kind and merciful. And it's very beautiful, this very beautiful refrain. And so I would like to read this opening section of the Quran, and it sets the tone not only for the Quran, but I would say for their whole faith. And so if the listeners would just listen for the im rhyme scheme, they will know that's the part that is talking about God is kind and merciful. So here it goes, and this is a farewell, kind of loving farewell from the opening of the Quran. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki Yawmil Din. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. That's the opening of the Quran.
I've had many authors sing on my interviews, but none in Arabic.
It's chanting. I guess it's singing. Okay.
All right, you call it chanting. I'll call it end chanting then. All right.
All right.
At the end chanting. Thank you, Brad. The title of the book is Touching God, a journey, a guide to mysticism in Christianity and Islam, and our author, Brad Tyndall. Thank you, Dr. Tyndall, for joining me today. 180 pages of great read. What is the process for getting a copy of your book?
Well, it's pretty much available all over the place online. You can go to Author House itself and find it. But the easiest way is probably Amazon or Barnes & Noble. And for the time being, that's probably the easiest way to get it, to order it, either hardback, soft copy, or for Kindle.
Yes. Have you completed a website as yet?
It's in development, and it's probably going to be called Mystic Pita, because I have a group of friends who are kind of fellow mystics, and we're putting that together, and we kind of meditate together and chant and whatnot. So that's what's coming. Probably maybe by the time this is aired, Mystic Pita will be out there.
All right. Thank you for joining me today. For Author House and Author Talk, this is J. Douglas Barker.